This is the two-wheel drive mod open short course Amain. Cross the line first, Kale. Followed closely by Steve Beasley. We have a battle for that #1 spot. Your leader coming through the chicane and down over the double. And over the triple, Kale driving the purple, green, and white Kyoto. Followed closely by Steve Beasley in the blue, black, and white SC10. These guys have managed to figure out how to get the power to the ground. They are driving a good, clean race. Jody Smith has moved all the way up into that #3 spot from the 6th qualifying spot. The current lineup is Kale, Steve, Jody, Brad, Mike, Robert, Kenneth, Shane, CJ, and Kevin, who's out of it. Your leader's coming through lap traffic. Let him by. Jody Smith has slid into that #2 spot in front of Steve Beasley. These guys are still all 2.4 seconds apart from each other. Jody Smith driving the ketchup and mustard colored fluorescent truck. Bobbles a little bit. Steve Beasley slips past him, but he's right on Steve's tail. That battle for #2 is heating up. Kale stretching his lead out a little bit, but they are still all within 3 seconds of each other on the same lead lap. The fight right now is for that #2 spot between Jody and Steve Beasley. Jody goes on a little bit, let Steve get away from him. Your leader gets tied up with a little bit of lap traffic. Current lineup now is Kale, Steve, Jody Smith, Brad Allen, Mike, Kenneth, Robert Hendrick, CJ, Shane, and Kevin Roberts, who is standing here with me. Steve Beasley looks to be catching up with Kale a little bit. They are 2.6 seconds apart. And Jody Smith made up his little time that he's allowed Steve to get in front of him. Kale and Steve are battling for that #1 spot. It's about a 3-second difference. Good driving, Mike. Good driving. Letting the #2 guy come by.
7 minutes left.
Great etiquette. Top 3 still. Kale, Steve, and Jody. Steve Beasley, 2.1 seconds behind Kale. Jody, 4.1 seconds behind Kale. 2.1 seconds behind Steve. Kale and Steve both fighting that lap traffic. That seems to be their only obstacle, but they're getting through this track like it's nothing. The lap traffic's the only thing that's holding them back. You got your #2 guy. Let him through. Coming through the infield. Thanks. Your leader's on his lead. Allows the #2 guy to get past him. You got a race now. Steve Beasley taking over the lead from Kale. You got 1 and 2 coming back over, and Kale took the inside lane. That was a head chop. Steve Beasley and Kale going through the infield. These guys are going at it. They are going at it, not giving an inch to either principal. Kale, your leader in the blue, or in the purple, green, and white Kyosho, followed closely by Steve Beasley. Had a little bobble there, let Kale get in front of him, but he is still right on Kale's tail. Jody Breeze is still in the #3 spot, followed by Brad Allen, who's moved up into that #4 spot. Kenneth Brooks, #5. Mike Moore dropped down 2 spots. Robert Hendricks come up. You got Shane, CJ, and Kevin Roberts. CJ gets hung up on the pipe. Steve Beasley managed to get past Kale. They are going through the infield, chasing one another. They are doing nothing but swapping leads. Jody has managed to pull up and get within 4 seconds of both of those guys.
5
So
minutes
you got a
left.
battle for that 1, 2, and 3 spot. Kale had a little bobble. Managed to let Steve get a little distance between them. 1.9 seconds between your leader and the number 2 guy. Your leader, Steve Beasley, in the blue, black, and white, team associated. Going down the back straightaway and coming over the double. Kale, your number 2 guy, in the purple, green, and white, Kyosho, coming over the back double and over the triple. 1 and 2. Less than 1 second apart. Coming through the infield. Please let the leaders go past you. Good driving. Your leader, Steve Beasley, navigating through the track and lap traffic. He gets a little bobble. Kale gets on his tail. Steve took an outside move, and they're both on their lid. Both of them. 1 and 2. And Jody gets past both of them. Now you got a real battle for number 1. Jody Breeze is in front with the fluorescent orange and yellow truck. He got past both Steve and Kale. Steve and Kale are battling it out with each other. Jody goes right past them. 1, 2, and 3. Less than 2 seconds apart. It's 1.2 seconds between 1, 2, and 3. Your leader, Jody Smith, coming through in the fluorescent orange and yellow truck, followed closely by Steve Beasley and Kale. Those guys are glued to each other's bumper. Jody gets hung up. All 3 of them are hung up. All right. Good driving, guys. Good etiquette. It is still Jody, Steve, and Kale coming through the inside. This is going to be a battle to the end. Steve and Kale are battling feverishly, and they've been doing it since the beginning of the race. They let a newcomer in this mod class, and his name is Jody Smith. He had a little bobble, and Kale got right past him. These guys are battling out. Jody is on Kale's tail, and Steve is on Jody's tail. Difference between 1 and 3, 1.0 seconds. Difference between 1 and 3, 1.0 seconds. Your leader, Kale Shetler, coming down the backside in the purple, yellow, and green Kyosho. Jody bobbles a little bit, let Steve get past him. It is still 1, 2, and 3. They're still all about 3 seconds apart. Yep, there's a 3.3 second difference between 1 and 3. Your number 1 guy, Kale, coming over the back, jumping over the back double, followed closely by Steve Beasley. This is going to be a race of bobbles. Steve Beasley turns it over and lets Jody catch up with him. Battle right now is for that number 2 spot. Jody is doing whatever, and a first-class headshot.
2 minutes left.
Steve turns it over again, and he's got to make up a little bit of time, but he is still less than a second off of Jody. Kale, however, has stretched out his lead a little bit. He's got about a 4.8 second lead on Steve, who almost caught Jody just then and hung the pipe a little bit. The battle right now is for that number 2 spot through the infield. You got Jody in the yellow and fluorescent orange truck coming down the back straightaway, being chased down by Steve in the blue, black, and white. Team associated SC10. He had a little bobble. He's let Jody get a little bit of space in between the two. Steve is running a faster lap than Jody, and he's catching him. You get your number 2 guy that gets hung up on traffic and over the pipe. Steve is now less than a second. He is on his tail and chasing him. Steve is running great laps, and he is making up a lot of time on Jody. He's just had a few bobbles, and it's kept him right off Jody's tail. But your race right now is for that number 2 spot. You got your leader, Kale, however, 10 seconds in front of those two now. He's stretched his lead out a little bit, got a little breathing room. Steve manages to take the inside lane and head chop Jody right back. Steve goes off the pipe a little bit, allows Jody to get back. Jody gets hung up on the pipe. Steve manages to clear the lap traffic and get through, using it as the buffer. Jody's got to fight around it just to get back to Steve. Steve got hung up on a pipe, but he's off now. Allow Jody to catch up with him. Less than a second apart. Your number 2 and number 3 guys, Steve in the white and blue team associated, followed by Jody in the orange and fluorescent orange Kyosho. They are battling for that number 2 spot, getting into each other. rubbing, racing. Jody's trying to take an inside line. Steve powers past him though. Sets him up for that inside line coming down the back straightaway. Jody gets on his lead. Steve almost bobbles in that corner right there, but he recovers and tries to stretch it out a little bit on Jody. Jody's trying to catch up right now. He gets up on the pipe a little bit.
Car 5 is done.
He's giving Steve a little room. Steve, you're done, buddy. You are done. Jody, you're done.
Car 1 is
Kale,
done.
you're done.
Car 7 is done. Car 4 is done.
Great race, guys.
Car 3 is done.
Great race, great race. Kale takes it. 28 laps.
Car 8 is done.
28 laps in a 10.20.